This is Platemark. My name is Ann Shafer, and I am your host. I'm an independent curator specializing in prints and printmaking. Now we're talking fine art prints, limited edition mainly, mostly, multiples, and it's kind of a specialized world. You're in a niche with me, so welcome. Today you have found me at Series 3 of Platemark, where I'm interviewing people who occupy special places in the print ecosystem. Today's guest is Dr. Linda Hults. Now, if you ever took a history of prints class anywhere in the Western world, English-speaking Western world, I should say, you probably used a textbook called The Print in the Western World, written by Dr. Linda C. Hults. It took me a while to track her down, and I found her. And I pinned her down, and we're going to have a conversation about that book and everything else having to do with art history and her interests in early modern prints in the North, mainly Holland. Okay, let's see. My positionality, I identify as a cis-het white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Images that Linda and I talk about will be over on the show notes, as you all know, at platemarkpodcast.com. And also there you can find a support and donate button, which will help me keep the lights on here at Platemark. It's just me. All right, I think that is all of the notes for housekeeping. Let's get rolling. Linda, it's so wonderful to see you. Thank you for coming on Platemark.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking me.
Well, of course. Can you, before I start peppering you with questions, because I have a lot, can you introduce yourself for the listeners?
I'm Linda Hults. I'm a retired professor from the College of Wooster, 73 years old. I live in Indianapolis with my husband, who's 86. I have 3 cats.
What are their names?
One is Midnight. She may walk across the bookshelf as we're going along. One is Ivy. She may come and squawk and want to get up here and walk across the computer. And the other is Neffy, and she's just in the bedroom, and she'll stay there.
Okay. We've had plenty of cats visit. Don't you worry.
Okay.
So what Platemark listeners probably will have heard, and their ears have perked up, is that you are a professor at the College of Wooster, which is my alma mater. And we found out when we were pre-talking that I graduated the year before you got there. So we completely missed each other, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I think so too.
And the other reason that Platemark listeners' ears might perk up is if they're following along with our History of Prints series. The Bible of History of Prints in the Western world is written by none other than Dr. Linda Hults, my guest today. So I've been wanting to get you on the show for a long time, so I'm grateful. Thank you.
I never thought of it as biblical in scope.
Well, it's certainly biblical in terms of, it's almost 1,000 pages, so I think we can call it biblical. All right, so usually I always like to ask people, how in the world did they stumble upon prints? Like, I was going along in art history and aiming at a painting, American paintings or whatever, and it never even occurred to me that prints were a thing. When did you first discover it and fall in love?
I think I knew about prints, a little bit about prints, even in high school. I loved the Toulouse-Lautrec lithographs. I took a lot of French courses, and I loved Toulouse-Lautrec and the Montmartre scene and everything. So I think I knew about it then. I don't know that I could have explained how a lithograph is made exactly, but I did know it was made in multiples. And yeah, I think I knew fairly early about it.
But in the French classes, did they say, and these are prints, and the way that they were used in society was they were plastered up all over Paris, and it was a huge change in visual culture?
I knew that they were advertisements. I didn't, it's not that the French teacher talked about them. I just was in this kind of French amour, if you will. I just love French things in the French language.
Sure. So then when you went to IU, Indiana University, and you assume you majored in art history, is that right?
No, I started out as a studio major.
Hold on. You're a maker?
When I was young, I made paintings and drawings and stuff. I started out as a studio major, but I pretty quickly realized that I was a better writer probably than I was going to be a painter. And, those studio professors, they're kind of harsh sometimes. And so I thought, this guy is telling me I'm scumbling in my paintings, and the art history teacher is telling me this is a really good essay. So I think, I made my decision. I was going to be an art historian.
Fair enough. I had a moment of studio art desires as well, and listeners will know very well the story of my father begging me to not do studio. But the irony is, at Wooster, when I was there, I graduated in 1986, and one of the studio professors was George Olson, who was an accomplished etcher, printmaker.
Yes,
and
I know.
I think I saw a few of them as we went along. I'm sure he was wonderful, but as a professor, he was a little bit not effusive. It was hard for me. I needed a little stroking.
He was an old-fashioned kind of a guy.
I didn't pursue the studio thing, which is, to my detriment, but that's all right. So after Indiana, did you take time off between that and going to North Carolina?
No time off except trying to earn money, waitressing in the summer. And I had a very serious boyfriend who was going to grad school in North Carolina. So I thought I would like to go there. And it was a really great program. Very good professors. I learned so much in that program. So that's how I got there. But there was really not much time. The other thing I did, I think I mentioned this to you, is that I did, after I graduated, I was an intern at the National Gallery of Art. So I did that stunt, and then I went to North Carolina.
But you knew you were on the academic track. When I went to grad school, I went to Williams because I knew I could keep a finger in museum studies and not have to do the academic part. So, but you knew.
Oh, yeah. Everybody knew since I was 5 years old, My younger sisters knew I was a nerd. Everybody knew I was a nerd. So.
Did you play teacher when you were a kid and your sisters were like, please, not again?
No, I didn't do that. But I was they just knew, I think, that I had different interests than they often did. I loved school, and I always wanted to be always in school, I would say.
And you managed to do it.
Yeah, I managed pretty much to do it.
You're still writing papers like you're in school.
Yeah.
So when you got your PhD, first of all, what did you write about? That's an important thing to know about you.
The first thing I wrote about was there was a National Gallery show about Hans Baldung Grün. They asked me to write a catalog essay on Baldung and the Reformation. So that's pretty much the first thing that I ever wrote. But that was, I was proud of that because it was in a National Gallery catalog. So that was an very early thing that I did.
The Reformation essay I'm so focused on Prince. I can't even imagine writing about the Reformation without writing about Prince. But was Prince an element in the essay?
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm. Those portrait prints, especially of the reformers in Strasbourg, were significant. I haven't looked at that essay in such a long time.
Do you still have it? I'm not sure I have my papers from back then.
Yeah, I do have it. It's back there on the shelf.
Right back there. The dissertation, was it on Baldung? No, it was on another aspect.
It was on him and the way he followed, but totally pretty much changed Dürer. He would use the motifs of Dürer and the subject matter, but the result was quite a bit crazy sometimes. And so I was interested in that, and I was interested in mannerism, which was, I don't know if it's such a hot issue now, but in the 70s in art history, a lot of people were talking about what is it, what is it, decline, is it repetition, what is it? So I was working with that concept, and that was my dissertation basically.
On History Prints, the series that we're doing with True, he's very much interested in Martin Luther and the Reformation and the whole shebang. And mannerism has popped up many a time as we've talked through various periods of time. I have to confess that when I took 101 at Worcester, I must have missed the day of mannerism because I had no idea what it was when I got to grad school and they gave us a quiz.
Mm-hmm.
One of the images was the Madonna of the Long Neck by
Oh,
Parmigianino.
yeah.
I'd never seen it before.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't until True was trying to explain mannerism and, how it fit into all of this sort of post Sack of Rome stuff that I was like, oh, of course, duh,
Yeah.
makes complete sense. But yeah, it was a little mysterious there for a while.
Caused a lot by social issues, or, was it just a stylistic concept? It was very much a question when I was writing.
But you figured it out.
Nah.
So then what happened in Tulsa? Was that your first job?
No, I had a couple of years at University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, and they canceled my contract. And so they told me that I was too intellectual for and it was absolutely true. I knew that because their students they just weren't ready, and probably it's partly my fault, but a lot of it was just what I was trying to work with. I mean, teaching an intro course to people who aren't really interested, and they're not up to college level yet, So anyway, then I took a job at Northern University in DeKalb. It was a temporary job because I didn't want a lacuna in my record, so I felt like I had to do something. So my husband was in Knoxville, and I went to DeKalb for a couple of years to teach. My first husband. In my second year at DeKalb, he divorced me over the phone, which some people don't believe, but he did. And so I gathered it must have meant because I took this job, but I was kind of interested in feminism before. That really, no, I'm serious.
Oh, I know.
It changed my scholarship. I said, there is something wrong with this system. It was hard in the 70s. It was hard to get a credit card. It was just for women, and to be treated like that, like, okay, I bought a coat. Now I want a new coat, and I'm going to throw the old coat away. I mean, that was kind of the mentality of it. So that happened, and I met my second husband, who was on the DeKalb radio station. So it worked out.
Good riddance to the first guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the feminism piece, and I don't think it was just because of Thalia, who you worked with and I had as an advisor, Thalia Guma Peterson, who was an art history professor at Worcester. Very, very ardent feminist. And I took, my first introduction to Jackie Windsor and Lee Montagu and, Eva Hesse. All those people was because of Thalia. And I really thanked her. It cemented my burgeoning feminism at that point. Yeah.
And Worcester had a very strong women's studies program at the time. And I could see the strength of it, and I really wanted to be a part of it. So I began teaching. In fact, I chaired that program for a couple of years, maybe a few years. So I began moving my teaching and my scholarship towards gender issues. So that was an important shift for me. Might have taken a lot longer if he'd not made that phone call.
Right. I feel like I had classmates in the mid 80s that were writing their own majors in women and gender studies. I mean, I don't think it was formalized until you got there.
It was a program.
Maybe I'm dreaming.
And it still is a program. It's not a department. They had Joanne Fry, Carolyn Durham. In fact, I was thinking about your independent study on women in Edward Hopper's work. And I think if I had been there, I might have said, Ann, go talk to Carolyn Durham, because she also was a film scholar, and Hopper's work is very intimately related with film. So that's a really strong program and a kind of a pioneering program.
Yeah, I'm sorry we weren't there at the same time because I did not go talk to the women's studies people at all. I was just flying blind, really. It's a little embarrassing now.
No, that's all right.
When you were teaching in women and gender studies, you were still teaching in art history, and were there opportunities to teach in both things in the same course? Were you doing that?
Sure. I did upper level courses with gender as a theme. I did a course on the European witch hunts. I did a course on, well, this isn't art history, although film history, kind of similar to art history. I did a course on gender in classic American films up to 1960, from about the 30s to 1960. I love that. That was a seminar.
That sounds great.
We had Betty Davis and Joan Crawford and, all these interesting films.
Well, and some of them, like Hedy Lamarr, wasn't she a war spy or something? Like incredible histories that you wouldn't, Hollywood would never project.
Yeah, she was a engineer, and I can't remember what she engineered, but she was an engineer. So
yeah, I think she held some patents on something important. I can't remember what it was.
Great.
Yeah. All right, so now we should turn to the tome, the book, das Buch.
Bible.
You were telling me about what made you decide to do it in the first place. And I mean, it was fascinating, just the idea of how hard it was to teach history of prints without it.
Well, as we talked about, there were books that would be helpful to students and interesting, like the A. Hyatt Mayer, Prints and People. There was a very dry book by Hind about the history of engraving. And I think he also had one about woodcuts. There was the Little Ivan's very helpful book about techniques and so forth. But I wanted something that would work for an upper level undergraduate course or graduate student course of a semester's length. So I wanted something that had footnotes and bibliography that the students could follow up on. I divided it into 13 chapters so it could fit in a semester. As we talked about, I tried to sort of to tone down a little bit the technological focus of some of the other people who were writing about prints, curators, states, and tiny details of technique and so forth. Not that that's not important. So I had that in there, I think, but I didn't put the meaning of the subject aside in favor of the technical stuff. So, and I wanted it to fit, thinking that an undergraduate who would take a course like that would have had a introductory survey, the 101, 102, that I was assuming was a background that they hadn't seen many prints in, a few maybe. But the structure of the book was would be familiar to them,
I always feel like the art history itself, not just interesting. I just had a thought that art history is basically our social, cultural history, which goes alongside, politics and wars and stuff. It just occurred to me that the history of prints is actually right in the middle. It's so much entwined with the social change in history and reacting to. It's much more aligned with that other column of history than art history sometimes. Interesting.
Yeah, I suppose you're right for political prints, and I'm the kind of person who can kind of see politics in just about anything. I mean, politics are in landscapes, so I have always seen art, whether it's prints or paintings or whatever, as very much a social phenomenon. Of course, aesthetic, but for me, I always need to have the context, the social context in there some way. I mean, I had teachers in grad school who tended to look at style a lot, formalist, and it always drove me nuts as a student because it's not just about that. I had this one modernist teacher, and he would kind of stand up there and go, Matisse, and I, just spewing over the beauty of Matisse. And I'm thinking, why is that woman naked? And why is she, why does she have on harem pants? And, why?
Yeah, I'm with you. The Baltimore Museum of Art, as you probably know, has the largest collection of Matisse in the world outside of the family. And it's primarily prints. Yeah. Yeah. They have 42 paintings and, oh gosh, I don't know, probably 150 drawings and 500 prints. And, the more you learn about him, the more I'm just like, what? Why do we like him? Sorry, people.
Yeah. And so I guess it's not that I'm not affected by aesthetic beauty. I've seen Vermeer paintings that just make my jaw drop. I can't, I'm just stunned by how beautiful it is. But I always want to know the why.
I feel like Vermeer's why is a little opaque. We're never quite, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about Vermeer, because I'm like, he just doesn't fit in really.
Well, there are ways that he does fit in, with genre painting in Delft. I got really interested in Vermeer lately in terms of masculinity, because he's head of household in a sense, but the household is owned by his mother-in-law, right? After his major patron died and he wasn't getting the money, he had 11 kids and he died, his wife said, I can't think of the word she used, but of kind of a hysteria, of kind of he went crazy.
Like melancholy?
Well, that would be what one thing they would call it in the early modern period, I think. So he was in the masculinity category, kind of out of it, really. That's primarily a biographical thing. I don't know how that actually affects his paintings, except that they do dwell a lot on women.
Yeah, and because they're so domestically set, it does skew to women's work.
In the house. Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. You just wrote an article about Hultsius, one of my favorites. Well, it was a couple years ago, but I read it this morning, and I was I was fascinated by the feminist take on it. I had never really thought about all those. I mean, the whole system is set up to be masculine, right? It's just, but he also died of, well, not melancholy, but like another sort of interesting, right. Yeah. And the whole masculinity thing. Can you give us a quick jab on Hultsius and what you were trying to say?
I was trying to say that in his prints and paintings, you find what I would call a mythic masculinity, powerful, muscular, all those just curling muscles with the engraving and curling around the muscles and, bursting bodies and so forth, bursting with muscles. But he himself had great physical weakness, and that again made his masculinity compromised. And so the persona that he and Van Mander developed around him of being a protean artist and having endless creative possibilities and endless capacity for change in his art, that kind of godlike quality maybe was a compensation for a very real physical weakness.
You convinced me.
Well, thank you for reading that. I know it's a long haul.
Oh, no, it's good. And the illustrations are great. Yeah. It's so interesting. I'm not a scholar of Northern early modern anything. So I hadn't really paid attention to the Van Mander biography and the parallel to Vasari and, how they're just all setting up these tropes about masculine. It's fascinating. God dang.
Right.
Hultsius is a favorite. It makes me sad to think of him as being so, like, you wonder what his output would have been like if he had been more robust and healthy.
Because his outlook was fabulous. His output, rather, not outlook. And then going from engraver to painter in the later years of his career, Must have been quite difficult, I would assume.
But you made a point about, we always tell people that the reason he turned from engraving was because he was tired and ill and his eyesight was failing. And you point out that that's completely not true, or probably not true.
Yeah, I don't think that was why he went to painting. I think it was to keep up this persona of the protean master,
which is reinforcing and putting forth even more status on the, crazy, not the crazy genius, but the artist genius.
Mm-hmm.
And only in painting can one be purely autonomous and unique, and all of that stuff that we just try to fight.
Clearly, printmaking is more artisanal, and painting was, in this period, at a higher level.
One could argue it still is.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah. I always wonder about that. Like, why, who gets to decide? Do people sit around in a little circle somewhere and say, you know what, we're going to put forward only men, and we're going to put forward painting as the tip top, and the only important thing they can paint is, the Bible and history, and like, who decides all this stuff? Or is it just that it morphs over time and people follow what was, right before them?
I think over time, people follow what was selling the most and getting the most interest.
But you bring up an interesting point about the market being the driving force. Like, I have such a nonprofit brain because I'm a museum person, and I never think of money driving creativity.
Well, money and fame.
Yeah. I don't know. In my mind, I sort of always imagine that, a person who feels they need to create every day, which I didn't, which is why I'm not a studio major, that the drive to create was a whole different drive than the drive for fame and money.
Isn't it kind of mixed?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose it is. All right. So tell us about getting all of this stuff together for this book. It's nuts. It's 1,000 pages, 13 chapters. I mean, did you call on friends and say, hey, can you help me out with, Matisse?
Well, I did have people read it, and they were like Larry Silver read a lot of the chapters, and I did ask people who were in a different specialty to read it, and I was very grateful for that. But it was quite a haul, and about in the middle of it, I thought, why, Linda, did you ever think that you could do this?
We're glad you didn't stop.
But I'd invested so much already. I had to keep going with it. I had to. There was no dropping it.
Did you start with the stuff that felt easy, like the early modern stuff, and go contiguously through? Or did you say, today I'm going to write about Whistler?
I'm trying to remember. I honestly don't think I jumped around much. I think I was concentrating on a chapter pretty much at a time, because what I was doing is I would gather as many books and articles as I could about a range of time and about the artist. And I would just read. That's how I always work. I just read until I can hardly stand it anymore. And then finally something gels and I see, okay, this is the tack I'm going to take in this chapter. And I start with outlines, and I always had my students make outlines. A lot of them didn't like doing it, but I think it's a very important way to structure how a piece of writing is going to go. So I think I pretty much concentrated on each chapter.
How many years did it take altogether?
Well, I started it when I went to Tulsa. That was in 1980. The book didn't come out until 1996, so that's quite a long time. Quite a long time. I didn't, of course, at first I didn't think of writing a book myself, but after I couldn't really find something that I thought was suitable for that audience, the upper level undergraduate, or the graduate student, it was hard for me to believe that there wasn't something like that. Not that these other books were bad or anything. It's just that it didn't cover the whole story. And even my book doesn't cover the whole story, of course. No book does.
I think that the women artists class that I took with Thalia it was a recent course that she had developed only because this textbook had finally been developed on women artists. And in 1975, it couldn't have been taught, or it would have been much more difficult. Just like this idea that, things have to gel and somebody's got to write it and it's a giant project and the publishers are like, yeah, that's a great idea, but we're not going to pay you anything for it. And good luck with those illustrations.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Good luck with the illustrations. That's
yeah, because it's not like you're going to be making bazillions of dollars off the publication of this book with 1,000 illustrations in it. Like, it's not, come on, people.
Sometimes I didn't get royalties for a while because I traded the royalties for the color plates. But when I did start getting royalties, it was maybe a few hundred a year, maybe several hundred a couple of times, but it wasn't a huge amount. It was worth it.
Well, of course. Yes, and we thank you. But wait, so back up. You traded your royalties for the color plates, so the publisher said what?
I said, you just keep my royalties for a while and use the money to give the color plates.
Oh, my God. Oh, it's just so heartbreaking. Because when you look at the color plates are obviously important in all aspects of art and art history. So anytime there's an art history textbook being developed, you have to have multiple images in there, and they just make it impossible.
Yeah,
not that artists shouldn't get rights and, the money and all that stuff, but there's got to be a better way.
Yeah, and finding these prints, which collections had them, what a...
Pre-internet.
Really, was it? I'm trying to think.
Weren't you were writing letters and getting black and white prints of images?
Yeah. When did the internet come in?
It was in the early 90s.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was pretty rudimentary. It was like, 100 websites, not even Google then. It was Yahoo and what was that other one? And email. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I did. It was largely through written correspondence.
And sending checks of your own money.
Yeah.
What did you tell me the other day? You were writing an article with 30 illustrations and it was costing you $1,500 or something.
It's going to be about that.
It's a little backwards somehow.
Mm-hmm.
We need some foundation. So, all right, people, listeners, put your heads together. We need a foundation that funds illustrations for scholarship in book and in journal. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure that I paid for, I can't remember, did I pay for the black and white illustrations or did the press do that? I can't remember.
But I don't know. Good question. There must have been rights. Now, as we were discussing recently, that there's a lot of open collections. The Dutch, in particular, are very good about letting people use their images, particularly the ones that are not in
public domain. Well, one thing that I do remember that happened is that Jim Watrous, who wrote the book on American prints, a very good book on American printmaking, he donated his photographs to it.
Well, and if one were to attempt a book like this now, it would be all color. There would be no idea of doing black and white imagery and color imagery. It would all be in color. And I can imagine in the 80s, the press saying to you something like, well, if they're black and white prints, it doesn't matter if they're in black and white or color, right? Wrong.
Wrong, very wrong.
Yeah.
And I would like to have had the black and white ones in color because of the paper tone, which is very important.
And the ink tones and everything.
Yeah.
I remember the photographer at the BMA always had a really hard time matching the paper colors when it came to, when they were printing it for whatever magazine or whatever it was. It was the paper colors were always the hardest part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those old sort of tan, color beigey, whatever they were. Paper.
Or stark white, like copper.
Yeah. I guess it's like choosing white paint for your wall. There's 5 million shades of white.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so what are you working on now?
I'm working on this essay with the 30 illustrations called Seeing Satan. And that's for a book on the history of the devil in the Western tradition by Routledge. And I'm the only art historian in it. The rest are historians mostly, or literary scholars. I was kind of shocked when I asked them, well, how many illustrations does each author? There are 13 authors in this anthology, 13 or 15, but and they said, well, about 5 illustrations per chapter, and they are asking me to cover. They're asking me to cover the devil imagery from the early Christian period through the 19th century.
Oh, just that?
Yeah. So I just no. I can't do that,
And not just prints either. We're talking painting, sculpture, architecture, the whole 9 yards.
I think there's one sculpture. There are prints. There are a lot of prints, and there are paintings. Yeah, it's a mixture. It's a mixture of things. Not much sculpture, just one thing.
Does it seem like? I mean, it feels like the period with which you are I guess it would call your specialty is full of those kinds of images with the Bruegels and the Bruegel, however you pronounce it. Yeah. But was there a period of time that is basically without devil that you just were able to jump over, like the 19th century, or?
Oh, no. The devil was, well, there's a kind of a breaking point when, in the Enlightenment, when, for various reasons, people began to doubt, the reality, the ontological reality of Satan. At that point, he kind of morphed into a figure for politics. One of my favorite prints that I write about is a color print of the devil holding the baby Napoleon in his arms. It's called The Devil's Darling.
Oh my.
And that's a British satire. So he appears many, many times in British satire. And then in the Romantic period, he began to take on a kind of a heroic quality. What the Romantic artists and people like Percy Shelley saw Milton's Satan as a kind of heroic force. And he took on political, he was associated with socialism sometimes in a positive way, And then, of course, when you get to symbolism and decadent art, he's all over the place. I have 2 images I'm still trying to work on getting by Félicien Rops, Belgian decadent artist. And it's from a series called Les Sataniques, the Satanic Ones. And it's just women who are in lust for the devil. Oh. And so it's very, very disturbing. I'm not even sure we should show it, but in a way you have to show it because it is so disturbing, Oh, he's there, but he's not the same theologically based symbol that he was before.
But I'm rolling through my brain all of your gendered things, right? So he's the bad guy, but he's never really, if we are blaming the entire downfall of man or humans on the devil, shouldn't the devil be a woman in this masculine hierarchy?
Well, there's a very interesting book I'm reading now by an author, Scandinavian author named Faxneld, and it's called Satanic Feminism. And sometimes he could become kind of a symbol for feminism. It's kind of a taking women out of their bondage to marriage and their bondage to chastity and all this kind of stuff. So it's a really fluid symbol. It could be really fluid during that whole period after the Enlightenment, I think.
I feel like the devil and the whole witchcraft thing is all, they're like kissing cousins.
That's why they asked me to do this essay, because I had written a book on witchcraft imagery.
What span did that cover?
That covered early modern works through, the 15th century, really through Goya.
Okay.
Goya was the last chapter. That was a pretty long project too, because the literature for the European witch hunts, which I had encountered when I was doing my dissertation on Baldwin and Durer, that literature is ginormous. So again, I'm reading, and kind of formulating chapters based on how did the witchcraft images function? What were they for? Were they religiously involved? Were they to discipline the subjects of a government, or were they satirical? Did they support the mythology of witchcraft, or did they satirize it? What was their purpose? So a very interesting bunch of artists there. There's Durer and Baldwin, and then in the 17th century, Jacques de Hayn. I never know if I'm pronouncing the Dutch names correctly, but him and Franz Franken had these spectacular witchcraft paintings. And Salvatore Rosa. I don't think Salvatore Rosa gave a damn about the idea of witchcraft. I think he just wanted to make a big spectacle. He was just very...
Well, that seems like a totally legit idea about why men would paint witches, which is, free reign on painting all kinds of weirdo, googly, zecky titty ladies.
Right. Because it was a subject that involved a lot of inventiveness, especially after Bosch, because you had to invent these supernatural effects and figures and everything. And I was initially going to call the book Witchcraft and Invention, Witchcraft Imagery in Northern European Art, but the publisher didn't like that title. They didn't like the word invention. Of course, I meant inventio as an artistic category, So I ended up giving it a different title. But it would be an appealing subject if you wanted to be known for the weirdness of your imagery.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many examples of it. And I always wonder, there's pattern books of column shapes and capitals and all that stuff. I mean, is there a catalog of weirdo creatures, or does everybody just go straight to Bosch?
Bosch is your basic Sears catalog of weird creatures, yes.
There's a good title.
I'll take this one. Bosch is pretty amazing.
I don't know a lot about him as a person. We were suggesting on our podcast that maybe there was an ergotism problem going on when he was creating these things, that he was hallucinating. Is there any truth in that story?
No, I don't. I've never heard that.
Oh, okay. Well, you would know.
The best person on Bosch is Lorinda Dixon. She has connected him very strongly with alchemy, as it was understood in the time. It could be bad. It could be understood as a high kind of art with a religious purpose. I think the fantasy had to do with his ideas about evil and sin, because the distortion of these creatures is a way of evoking sin.
Say more.
Like I am trying to say in my devil essay, how does the devil image develop? It develops in distinction to Christianity. It distorts God's nature, nature as God supposedly made it. So it distorts nature. It inverts doctrines of Christianity, and imagery is also a way of doing that, not just writing about it. So it's really based on inversion.
I feel like you're one of those very talented thinkers that, and I have a hard time doing this and remembering to do this, to think of things in binaries and opposites and reactions to each other and that kind of thing. Because you use the same structure in your Hultius article, which was really useful. I was reading it going, I never placed that structure on top of a topic like that in order to understand, the inversion versus, like, it makes complete sense. And I wish I had better brain cells like that. Because that makes total sense.
Maybe they're not better brain cells. They're just my brain cells.
I'll take a few of those. But back to Bosch, his imagination must have been completely outsized. Even if you're trying to think of the thing that would be a perversion of nature, so to speak.
Right. Uh-huh.
Like, I don't know that I would ever have gone to where he went.
Yeah, well, he kind of, the margins of medieval manuscripts have those grotesqueries, if you will, and the bas de page has strange imagery that's sometimes not even related at all to the text. It kind of comes out of that, those drolleries, as they would call them. So he doesn't come out of nowhere, but boy, does he build something that's fantastic.
Right. It's on steroids.
Artist. No, I think if I were to try to imagine what kind of a person he was, I would say he was a very devout Christian.
Okay. Catholic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they're all going to hell.
Reformation. Although, I mean, the Reformation, you can see in Bosch satires of the clergy, which are very much part of the Reformation. I mean, Luther didn't come out of nowhere. There was a critique of the church, before he put his theses on the Wittenberg Cathedral door.
1517, right?
Yep, 1517.
Yes, I did it.
Yes.
I'm not good with dates. True can whip dates out of his brain when we're doing history of prints. Like he knows, Raphael's life and death date. I'm like, how do you know that stuff? Why is that in that brain? But 1517 I've got now. I feel like you're modest about your contribution to the field is what I really feel. It was a big deal.
Yeah. I don't think of myself that way. I
know.
I think of myself as just somebody with a job, Even though I'm retired, I think of it's kind of still my job.
To help people understand pieces of history and how they relate to the artistic output, or
to contribute something to art history,
Right. Because I don't think my name is going to be in the art history books.
Oh, you never know.
I think I'm going to be over here in the curatorial side.
No. Thing I want to get back to working on is a book on masculinity and early modern Northern European artists. I kind of lost track of that with this devil essay, which has been very devilish to write. And my husband's been sick and all that. But I really do want to get back to that and see if I can, maybe it should be broken up into articles, kind of similar kinds of analyses like in the Goltzius article that you kindly read. So
it was fascinating.
Maybe I won't. I don't know.
Would you be okay if I included a link to your article in the show notes so that other people can get to it?
Sure. And
okay.
Anyway, if you have a college library, you can get it from JSTOR.
Okay.
And one good thing about that journal is they publish everything in color. I was astonished.
It's the wave of the future.
Mm-hmm.
But the masculinity thing in Northern, we're not talking Italy. So like the Italians are all running around naked because it's warm.
No. No.
How does it manifest in the North?
The way I kind of have in my mind of laying this possible book out is I have a chapter on Dürer and the male body. And if you look at Dürer's work, there's a real difference between the way he treats the female body and the male body. And of course, it's because of sexual difference. I know that. But if you look at the Adam and Eve engraving, Eve is kind of, she's not quite as effective a figure, I think, as Adam. And so I was gonna try and look at the system of proportions and just the way he treats the male figure. And then I was gonna do maybe another chapter on Goltzius, maybe a chapter on Rubens and Roman masculinity, him knowing so much about ancient Rome and biblical masculinity in Rembrandt, Vermeer, and as I was talking about, his ambiguous position as head of household, Vermeer as head of household.
Right.
So something like that I have in mind, and I've kind of started drafting some parts of it, but I haven't gotten back to it yet because I've been really really busy with life,
Right. Life intercedes.
Yeah.
But you'll be coming at this through a feminist lens, I assume.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Well,
But masculinity, there's a wonderful book by Todd Reeser, Masculinity in Theory. And so it integrates gender theory. It used to be focused more on women, with gender theory on men. And I just find it really fascinating material. So if I can get back to that before I vanish into into oblivion, I will do so.
yeah, I think that'd be really interesting. There was an exhibition, was it in Philadelphia, on masculinity recently? I don't think it went back as far in time, but I'll dig it up and put it in the show notes.
I mean, we can talk about how women appear in art, with their hair and pants and all that kind of Matisse stuff. But you can also deal with men as images.
So what do you, I've always been confused by Manet's Déjeuner sur l'herbe and why she's naked.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like she's so vulnerable in that image that it makes me queasy to look at it.
Yeah,
and true, my friend is like, oh no, she's powerful. She's confronting the viewer. I'm like, she's naked. And those guys aren't.
Right.
Right? I don't understand it.
Manet is a really interesting artist, I think.
I mean, what would ever make you, even if you were looking at The Judgment of Paris by Raphael or Raimondi, whoever, why would you have, makes me
why
nuts.
Would you have one person naked and the others not?
Why is she naked? Makes me so mad. Well, Linda, I think we should wrap it up. We've been talking for more than an hour, and I just so appreciate you coming on Platemark and sharing your story with people, because I think, when textbooks sit on the shelf, you forget that there's an actual person behind them and that they might, be down the street writing another book,
You said you might ask me about what advice I would give young art historians.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
When you're trying to publish, never underestimate the importance of publishing stuff. Because the reason I left Tulsa is because they didn't give me tenure. Because I hadn't published enough, they said. They weren't counting things that are in the pipeline. They didn't count things that were in exhibition catalogs. Right? Which is ridiculous. So I said, okay, bye-bye, Oklahoma, And what I had to learn, I think the hard way, is have as many things going, as many pans on the stove as you can, Don't just go from one publication to a next one. Try to, keep all your possibilities open. That is advice I would give people, because you don't really think of it, when you're a grad student and you've done this huge dissertation and you're tired, but you really can't let up. You've really got to keep trying.
I feel like the divide between academia and, museums / exhibition catalogs is, I don't have a PhD, so I can identify a thing that I have run into with colleagues called PhD-itis, which is you don't have one, but I do. And but this idea that, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You can only get in if you're part of this club and if you do X, Y, and Z, and we will only give you tenure if you do, A, B, and C. Like it's a academic industrial complex.
Yeah.
Is what it is.
It's hard. But I was really shocked when they said you're not counting an essay in the catalog by the National Gallery of Art.
Right.
Because I have learned so much from really good exhibition catalogs. They can be revolutionary. They can change the whole idea of what an artist is about, and it's ridiculous not to count them.
Yeah, I agree. And they are so focused on the object, where I feel like art history, academic art history can skew so theoretical, I guess is the term, but less, I mean, I think print people are always on the objects, but it can stray.
Yeah, it can.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you had to do it over again, would you change anything? Your career?
After my dissertation, I would have begun perhaps submitting articles to peer-reviewed journals more, because I was kind of, I did this, now let me do this one, now let me do this one, but you have to try to do it. You have to have a number of things going on, because you never know what's going to happen, But I learned pretty fast. After that, I was pretty gung-ho,
There's two problems with this scenario. One is that's a lot of fires to keep burning in your brain. And two,
yes,
it doesn't pay you a thing.
Right.
The whole industry is based on the glory of getting your name on something.
Yeah. And,
yeah.
If I had children, I probably wouldn't, I don't have children. So if you have a family and you're trying to do this, it's very, very hard.
Yeah. It is. Mine are just moved out of the house, so I'm suddenly quiet. So maybe I can turn my brain on again. I don't know. Thank you so much for coming on Platemark, Linda. It was really great talking to you and hearing your story. It's been really fun. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And there you have it, people, my interview with Linda Hults. I was so happy to find her and have her talk to us about that crazy book she wrote. I mean, it's 1,000 pages. Thank you to Linda for being a great interviewee. I enjoyed our conversation thoroughly. Also, a thank you, as usual, to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music, and one to Dan Fury of Extension Audio for helping me sort through some wonky audio. Thank you so much for all your help. I think that's it. Is that it? I think that's it. All right. We will see you next time.